All right, guys, let's start off organic chemistry with a little bit of background knowledge. All right. So, this entire topic is about organic chemistry. And when we talk about organic chemistry, the thing we're referring to, the thing that makes something living, is the fact that it has carbon in it. All right. And we've kind of heard these words before. Like whenever they start looking at different planets, we always look for carbon based life. Whoa. We always start looking for carbon based life. That's because all living things have to have carbon inside. So before we go on to all of our different organic molecules or our carbon-based molecules, we need to kind of understand what carbon is and why it's important to us. Now, one special thing about it is the fact that the number of bonds it can do. Carbon can have 4 bonds, right? So if I drew a carbon molecule, here's carbon, and then I can have 4 things attached to it, just like this, okay? This right here, carbon, if there's nothing else specified attached to it, they're always hydrogens. And so when I look at carbon and hydrogens together, this is called an alkane. So an alkane is just a carbon-hydrogen molecule. Nice. So now that we have our carbon-hydrogen molecules, we can actually start to name them. And this is something that's just a memorization. So these are my different types of alkanes. All right. We're only going to memorize up to 10. So I want to know what a 1 carbon, I'm going to name a 2 carbon, 3 carbon, 4 carbons, and then so on, all the way up to 10. Oh, that's supposed to be a C. 8, 9, and then 10 carbons right here. All right, now, the first 4 are named a little funky. Say we always like word roots, but word roots just don't apply to this one. So a 1 carbon alkane, his name is methane. 2 carbons, his name is ethane. 3 is propane, which we've heard before. So the propane that you guys use to light your grills and stuff, that's just 3 carbons with hydrogens attached. And then a 4 carbon molecule, this is butane. Again, if you go camping, you've probably seen butane before. And then after this, they start naming again like the word roots we're used to. So this is pentane, 6 is hexane, 7 is heptane, 8 octane, 9 nonane, and 10 is decane. And the reason we need to know our alkanes is because the alkanes, we said over here that they're carbon-hydrogen molecules, that these form the basis of organic molecules, or molecules that I'm going to see in living things. So if I start to kind of see where these names come from, then you'll be able to understand how many carbons and what we're talking about. So now we need to learn how to draw our organic molecules. And when you start looking at this, you remember these are always made up with carbons and hydrogens. So if I looked at methane would look something like this. Carbon, we know carbon has 4 bonds, and right now they're all just filled with hydrogens. That's great. So there's methane. If I wanted to draw, let's do propane. Okay, so propane has 3 carbons. So here's 1, 2, 3. And then remember, carbon can have 4 bonds. So this guy already has 1 right there. So the other 3 are hydrogens. Hydrogen, hydrogen. This guy, this carbon right here has 1, 2. So 3, 4. And then this carbon only has 1. So that means I get to fill up the other 3 with hydrogens. All right, so that doesn't look too bad. What if we did hexane, right? Now hexane was 6 carbons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then everything else is filled up with hydrogens. There's 1 bond right here. So 1, 2, 3 for hydrogens. This guy gets 2 hydrogens. This guy gets 2 hydrogens. This guy gets 2 hydrogens. This guy gets 2. And then this guy gets 3. All right, well, you can see where this would start to look really, really messy. And so organic chemists have come up with a very nice, easy way for us to start showing carbon-hydrogen bonds without having to do this whole mess, because this gets really, really tedious really fast. But an easy way to draw organic molecules is actually just by using lines. So every time I have a line, I mean at the end of every line, there's a carbon. And if I know there's a carbon, that means the other bonds coming off of it, if nothing else is specified, is going to be my hydrogens. So if I look at this molecule, it has 2 carbons. So this would be my ethane. Ethane. But how about we go back and do propane? Propane was 3 carbons, and it kind of looked like this over here. But if I draw it with just lines, so now propane looks like that, because at every end, or where the lines touch, there's a carbon. So there's actually a carbon here, a carbon here, and a carbon here. But this molecule, when it looks like that, is a lot easier to draw and recognize versus this guy up here. And of course, it starts to make a lot more sense. Like if we do hexane, remember hexane had 6 carbons. So now I can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whoops, need 1 more, 6. So instead of hexane being all of these carbons and these hydrogens right here, now I can draw it really, really simple like this, which is going to help us out, because later when we start talking about functional groups we write out. So now we can just count the number of carbons, but really focus on a functional group. Like if I had right here, so here's my hexane, maybe I threw in a functional group of, how about OH, right? So if you guys are just looking at this molecule right here, this long drawn out one, and you see, I mean, it's kind of hard to see that OH in the midst of all the hydrogens and the bonds and the carbons. But 4. So if I do it over here though, this OH would be off of this carbon. Now when I look at this molecule, the OH, this stands out a lot more. And I need to see those types of things, because whenever we talk about functional groups, which I guess is where we're going next, when I talk about a functional groups, what they do is they are going to determine how compounds, how molecules interact with each other. And that's really important, because if I have this molecule and maybe this group up here, this is now a functional group, maybe that functional group doesn't interact well with one on another molecule next to it. And so as chemists or organic chemists, they would want to know that, so that way they can start predicting what would happen. Now, functional groups, there's another list of those. This is kind of memorization right now. Functional groups, we're going to go ahead and memorize a few of them. So the first one, it's OH. Okay, we may have seen OH before. OH is a hydroxyl group. And a hydroxyl group, characteristic, because it has this oxygen right here, and oxygen is super negative, right? He likes to take electrons away from people. That means hydroxyl groups are really, really polar, and If your molecule has a lot of hydroxyl groups, then he's probably going to dissolve in water really, really well. My next functional group is COOH, or it's COO. It kind of depends on if the hydrogen is there or not. This is called a carboxyl group. And the fact that he can give this hydrogen up is actually his characteristic. My carboxyl groups, these are acidic. Because if you look at the definition of an acid, is that he lets go of his hydrogen ions easily. And this carbon, oxygen, oxygen, hydrogen, I can get rid of this pretty easily. His name, besides carboxylic group, is also called carboxylic acid. All right, let's do our next one. Now this is either COH or CO. His name is carbonyl. He's a carbonyl group. And because of these oxygens, we're just going to go ahead and classify him as a polar group. All right, let's move on to our next one. Let's do, how about PO4? Now, PO4, I think we've seen this, is a phosphate group. In our phosphate groups, he is super polar. Because if I look, I have 4 oxygens, which are super electronegative, around a phosphorus, which is also really, really negative. So we talk a lot about phosphate groups here after, during the whole semester. So I have hydroxyl, carboxyl, carbonyl, phosphate. The next one would be SH. This is sulfhydryl. And sulfhydryl, again, is going to be pretty polar because if you know where sulfur is. My next group after this would be hydroxyl, carboxyl, carbonyl, phosphate, sulfhydryl. A really, really important one, NH2. NH2 is an amine group, right? And amine, this will mean a lot to us later when we start talking about amino acids. Again, he's negative, so we could classify him as polar as well. 4, 5, 6. I'm missing one. Well, we'll have to come back to it later. Hydroxyl, carboxyl, carbonyl, phosphate, sulfhydryl, amine. Yep, I don't know. We'll have to come back to it. But these functional groups, like I said, this is how we start determining the characteristic of molecules. And so if we wanted to look at a functional group, so remember we can draw our molecules like this, right? So how many carbons would that be? Really quick, see if you can figure out how many carbons that is. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is a hex. This is hexane right here. There's 6 of them. But now, if I draw that molecule like that, then I can start adding my functional groups to it. And like I said, now I can kind of see where I need to pay attention to. Some molecules, though, they're not always in straight chains. I can also draw organic molecules like this. So if you look at it, how many carbons do I have? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the same thing as this, except this one is in a straight chain. And this one over here is in a ring form. And that's the only difference. Some molecules, especially when we talk about carbohydrates and monosaccharides, they like to be in a ring structure versus other molecules like to be in a nice straight chain structure. So let's try one more. Let's see if we can figure it out. How about this? It's not a house. That's an actual molecule. So how many carbons am I looking at? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this can be a pentane molecule. Or if I wanted to draw it in a straight chain, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. So it's like this and this are essentially the same thing at the moment, but then when I start adding my functional groups to it, then it's going to be, it's going to determine the characteristics and then what my molecule is going to do. All right, so you guys can recognize shapes. We've talked about functional groups. We've talked about the alkane groups and what alkane is. Again, it's just the basis of all organic molecules. So that way, when we go on to our other videos about carbs and lipids and proteins and nucleic acids, you guys will start seeing these same structures, but instead of having a hydrogen here, then I'm going to have some type of functional group. And there you go. And then every molecule that we talk about from here until the end of time is going to have carbon in it. Hope you guys got it.